I want to ask you, the listener, a direct question right out of the gate. Um, what is the most ruthless, effective strategy you use for, long-term career and financial success?
Yeah, that is a pretty heavy question to start with.
It is. And, well, if you were to map out a 10-year plan right now, your mind probably jumps to the usual suspects. You might think of relentless networking, grinding out those infamous 80-hour work weeks, or maybe just optimizing your entire schedule around like complex productivity hacks.
Oh, absolutely. The classic hustle culture playbook.
Exactly. But today, in this deep dive, we are looking at a completely unconventional answer to that question. We're exploring a strategy that requires, well, a fraction of the time, involves zero networking, yet claims to completely alter the trajectory of your professional life and your financial
Which
ceilings.
sounds a bit like a late night infomercial, to be
I
honest.
know, right? But we are talking about a simple 15 to 20-minute daily yoga and meditation practice.
And we really need to clarify, we are not approaching this from the typical wellness angle. We aren't talking about, doing a few stretches just to feel a little bit less stressed on a Sunday afternoon.
Right, right. Definitely not.
We are looking at this through the lens of a very specific, grounded assertion that this brief daily practice actually serves as a profound psychological and intellectual engine for scaling up in life, and specifically in the ruthless arenas of business and institutional finance.
Yeah, so our mission today is to explore a really fascinating presentation from a YouTube creator named Osman. His channel is called the Blind Muslim Yogi.
And he's an advanced level yoga and meditation teacher, right?
He is. And he's also a master level energy healer who works with critical care and terminal illness recovery. So those are heavy, profound areas of expertise. But in the specific source material we're unpacking today, he completely shifts gears.
He makes a very bold, almost provocative assertion about the hard, measurable business advantages of his daily practice.
Okay, let's unpack this right here because I have some major initial pushback. I mean, how on earth does 15 minutes of breathing and stretching translate into massive business assets or like international contracts and high-level banking status?
It sounds totally ridiculous at first glance.
Right. It sounds like we are forcefully jamming two completely unrelated worlds together.
It does. I mean, you hear yoga and you immediately think of a studio with incense, not a boardroom negotiating a multi-million-dollar contract.
Exactly.
But we aren't looking at this as some mystical process where you manifest wealth just by sitting cross-legged. The source material provides a very specific 10-year case study.
Right. He tracks this over a whole decade.
Yeah, Osman gives us a stark, real-world contrast between two different career trajectories over a decade, one operating with this practice and one operating without it. So we're really examining the tangible, compounding results of this specific daily input.
But wait, before we look at the massive 10-year results, we need to understand what that daily input actually is, because the barrier to entry he describes is, well, it's surprisingly low.
Yeah, he's very realistic about it.
We aren't talking about retreating to a mountain for a month. We aren't even talking about a grueling 90-minute hot yoga class every single morning. The practice being discussed in our source is only 15 to 20 minutes a day.
30 minutes is the absolute maximum, he says.
Right, 30 max. And the Souls is incredibly candid about the immediate effects. He acknowledges that when you first start doing this, nothing earth-shattering happens. You just feel a bit calm. You feel a bit more together.
And he points out that you eventually just get used to that baseline of calm. The transition isn't even that apparent in your day-to-day life.
Yeah, it just becomes the new normal.
Exactly. You wake up, you do your 15 minutes, and you just feel slightly more centered. The nervous system regulation kind of just happens quietly in the background.
And here is where it gets genuinely funny, because he brings up this really surprising point. He essentially says, look, if you were just chasing a feeling of calm, you could just have a drink.
I love that part. It's so honest.
It is. He explicitly argues that having a stiff drink is probably going to make you feel immediately better and far more relaxed than sitting down to do 15 minutes of meditation.
Which completely strips away the usual pretension around wellness routines.
Totally.
Yeah.
But it also completely begs the question, if the immediate return on investment for a cocktail is higher than a meditation session, why are we bothering with the yoga?
What's fascinating here is that the goal isn't the immediate, fleeting feeling of calm. If we look at the neurobiology of what's happening, a drink provides a sudden spike in dopamine, right?
Right. And it depresses the nervous system.
Exactly. A temporary depression of the central nervous system. It masks the stress. The 15-minute practice, however, is fundamentally altering how your brain processes stress over time.
So it's building a foundation, not just applying a Band-Aid.
Exactly. The true value of this practice is completely invisible in the short term. You will not see the return on investment on a random Tuesday afternoon.
That is such a key point.
Osman asserts that you have to measure the results in 5 to 10-year increments. That is the only timeline wide enough to reveal the massive intellectual and psychological evolution taking place beneath the surface.
So it is an extreme exercise in delayed gratification.
Very extreme.
It's like planting a sapling, you know? You don't stare at the dirt the next morning and complain that you don't have any shade yet.
Yeah, the perfect analogy.
So if the payoff takes a decade, let's look at the actual 10-year experiment he lays out, because he invites us into a real-world comparison to prove this long-term compounding effect.
Right, to see what happens when someone doesn't do this.
Exactly. What happens when someone is grinding it out in the business world without this daily practice? Let's look at the control group.
Osman sets up a very clean comparison here. He contrasts himself, someone who has been self-employed for 29 years, and maintains this daily 15-minute practice with a peer.
And this peer is also in business, right?
Yes, this peer is also an established businessman, operating in the same industry and just a year or two older than him. So they're operating in a nearly identical generational and professional context.
Okay, so they're starting from a very similar baseline, and then they meet up again after about 11 years. So a full decade of business cycles, economic shifts, and just, personal effort has passed.
A lot can happen in 11 years.
Right. So when Osman looks at his peer's life, what does that 10-year trajectory look like without the practice?
It looks like total stagnation.
Yeah.
After 11 years, the peer was in the exact same primary business, but the crucial detail is that he was barely surviving.
Barely surviving after a decade.
Yeah. The source notes that this peer had been forced to start taking on a few extra side hustles, creating additional small sources of income, just to manage his basic overhead.
Wow.
He was working significantly more hours, juggling more responsibilities, but not actually advancing his net worth or his market position.
So he is basically a car stuck in the mud.
Pretty much.
He is hitting the gas harder and harder. The wheels are spinning at a frantic pace. Mud is flying everywhere because he's taking on all these side gigs, and he feels like he is doing an immense amount of work. But he isn't actually moving forward.
No, he is just digging the hole deeper to avoid sinking entirely.
And Osman shares this highly specific anecdote that it crystallizes just how deep that hole was.
Yeah, it's a really sobering moment. It highlights the difference between the illusion of business success and actual liquidity.
Right, so Osman was traveling internationally at one point, and he temporarily lacked access to his usual banking networks, so he needed a few days to get funds transferred.
Which happens when you travel.
Exactly. But he needed to make a payment almost immediately to secure a particular bargain he had found. He just needed a quick, short-term loan to bridge the gap, and the amount he needed was exactly $1,800.
Just $1,800.
Just $1,800. For an established business owner with over a decade of continuous operation, that should be petty cash. I mean, it shouldn't even require a second thought. So he reaches out to his successful businessman friend for the favor.
And the friend couldn't do it.
He couldn't do it.
No, he simply did not have $1,800 in disposable cash available.
I mean, think about that. A business owner, a full decade into his career, running a primary business and multiple side hustles, unable to float a temporary $1,800 loan.
It's wild.
Osman notes how jarring this realization was. It completely shattered the facade. The friend remained on the exact same financial and professional level he was a decade prior, just stretched, infinitely thinner, and clearly exhausted.
It really makes you wonder how often we confuse being frantically busy with actually scaling up. The peer was undoubtedly putting in the hours.
Oh, for sure. He was grinding.
But without an underlying psychological engine to process the stress and maintain focus, a decade of intense effort resulted in a completely flat trajectory.
Which naturally leads to the obvious question. If grinding it out with side hustles just leaves you broke and exhausted after a decade, what exactly was Osman doing differently during those same 10 years?
Right. Let's look at the yogi's upward trajectory, because the contrast he presents is, frankly, staggering.
So what happens with Osman?
Well, after returning from those international travels, Osman needed to incorporate a new company. He goes through the standard banking system, and this is where we see the tangible, measurable business results come into focus.
Okay.
He applies for a private bank account. Now, institutional banks have strict, unsentimental algorithms that assess a client's risk profile and financial potential, right?
Yeah, they don't care about your feelings.
Exactly. When Osman applied, the system automatically approved him for a private client's wealth account.
Which is the highest personal banking tier they offer.
Exactly. And for the business account attached to his new company, the algorithm automatically granted him their platinum level status.
Okay, hold on. I have to stop you there because this is where my skepticism flares up again.
I know where you're going with this.
Algorithms do not have a Zen detector. A banking computer doesn't care if your chakras are aligned or if you can hold a perfect downward dog. They care about credit history, revenue streams, and risk models.
Right, hard data.
Right. And he says he qualified for all of this automatically without having a single cent deposited in that specific new account yet. So how is he bridging the gap between a morning meditation and an algorithm granting him platinum status out of thin air?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, that is the most crucial part of this entire analysis. The bank's algorithm didn't look at Osman and decide he was lucky or, spiritually enlightened.
I'm racing not.
It judged him purely on his data. Over the preceding 10 years, while his peer was frantically spinning his wheels and likely making reactive, stress-driven financial decisions, Osman was building a pristine track record.
Ah, okay.
A clear, regulated nervous system leads to better executive function. Better executive function means you don't panic sell assets during a market dip. You don't take on predatory debt to cover a mismanaged cash flow.
You make consistent strategic moves.
Exactly. The algorithm simply looked at his historical financial behavior, his credit utilization, and his existing asset management. And it recognized the footprint of a highly disciplined, low-risk operator.
It saw a compounding upward trajectory that justified the platinum tier.
Precisely.
Okay, that makes a lot more sense. The yoga isn't magically changing the bank. The yoga is changing the operator, and the bank is reacting to the operator's flawless 10-year track record.
Yes. And the financial milestones he discusses from this point are massive. He conservatively projected making $3 million in the first year with this newly incorporated business, with a stated goal of scaling it up to $10 million a year.
$10 million a year. Wow.
And he is self-aware enough to note that, in the world of global conglomerates, $10 million is a drop in the ocean. But for his specific niche, it represents a highly optimized, upper-tier level of personal enterprise success.
Yeah, I think most people would be pretty happy with a $10 million run rate.
For sure. Furthermore, Osman mentions securing major international contracts during this period. He talks about surviving the massive economic disruptions of the COVID-19 pandemic.
Think about the psychological toll of that era alone.
Right. While many small business owners were operating purely from a state of fight or flight, making fatal financial errors that drove them into insolvency, he was able to maintain enough cognitive bandwidth to not only survive, but actually salvage and acquire massive property assets.
He explicitly uses the term asset-rich, doesn't he?
Yes, asset-rich.
He acknowledges he might not be flush with millions in liquid cash every single second, which ironically explains why he needed that $1,800 short-term loan while traveling. But in terms of foundational immovable wealth, he built an asset portfolio that nobody else in his peer group possesses.
Exactly.
He built an empire of property and contracts while the guy next to him was taking on a weekend side hustle just to pay rent.
And Osman attributes this stark, undeniable difference entirely to the psychological edge he gained through his daily practice. He states very clearly the defining variable between him and the peer who couldn't float the $1,800 is that he has been practicing yoga and meditation regularly for a decade.
But I want to challenge that assertion a little bit, or at least dig into the mechanics of it.
Sure.
Because if we aren't careful, this still sounds a bit too much like magic. The premise is 15 minutes of yoga equals a $10 million business and platinum bank accounts. There has to be a missing link here.
Right, there is.
You can't just sit on a mat, close your eyes, breathe deeply, and expect a bank manager to knock on your door with a briefcase full of international contracts.
You are absolutely right to challenge that, and the source material is actually very rigorous about the mechanics of this. It is a process of cause and effect, not manifestation. Osman introduces a crucial caveat that changes the entire context of his success.
Yes, the caveat. He makes it incredibly clear. Yoga alone does not hand you a $10 million business. The results depend entirely on what you are actively focusing on.
Yes, his exact phrasing is important here.
He says, I focus on developing myself in the business. The yoga is just the tool, but the business is the target.
Right.
If you don't have an ambition, if you aren't trying to build a specific skill or enterprise, then the practice isn't going to spontaneously generate a company out of thin air. You might just become a very calm, well-rested person who hasn't advanced professionally in 10 years.
It is the difference between having raw potential energy and directed kinetic energy.
Oh, I like that.
The daily practice provides the raw bandwidth, the emotional regulation, and the mental capacity. But you have to aim that capacity at a target. Osman gives a really fascinating visual analogy regarding the geometry of success.
The geometry of success. Break that down.
He says, imagine a graph charting your life over time. If you want to progress and build a business, but you do not have this daily practice to manage your stress, your line is going to stay relatively flat.
Okay.
You will have little bumps, a new client here, a failed side hustle there, but the overall trajectory is horizontal.
That is the car stuck in the mud. The engine is roaring, but the horizontal position doesn't change.
Exactly. But if you combine that exact same ambition with the daily practice, your trajectory angles sharply upward.
It goes diagonal.
Yes, the line starts moving diagonally across the graph. The ambition provides the forward motion, and the practice removes the friction that usually drags people down.
I look at it like a psychological bandwidth expander.
What do you mean?
Think about a computer that has way too many intensive programs running at the same time, right? It has 100 browser tabs open. It's sluggish. The fan is screaming. It keeps freezing. And it simply cannot run a high-level creative program because all its RAM is being eaten up by background noise.
Yeah, we've all been there with our laptops.
For sure. But for the vast majority of us in the professional world, our brains are that struggling computer. We have 1,000 background tabs open at any given moment. You know, financial anxiety, reactive emotions to an email we got yesterday, fatigue, imposter syndrome.
And managing those open tabs requires an immense amount of continuous metabolic and cognitive energy.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So what the 15 minutes of daily practice does is force quit the unnecessary tabs. It acts as a hard reset.
It clears the cache.
Yes, it clears the psychological static, and when the static is finally gone, you have access to your full RAM again. You can finally sustain the intense, high-level focus required to actually scale your ambitions.
Right.
While your competitors are freezing up and crashing because they're overwhelmed by the stress of a changing market, you are operating smoothly because you cleared your cache that morning.
That is a great way to look at it, because the business world, especially when you reach the level of securing international contracts and managing millions of dollars in property assets, demands an incredibly high sustained cognitive load. You have to navigate severe crises like the economic fallout of a global pandemic without succumbing to panic. The reason Osman's peers stagnated over 11 years wasn't necessarily a lack of desire or a lack of intelligence.
No, he was working hard.
Right.
Yeah.
It was almost certainly a lack of sustained psychological bandwidth. He burned out trying to process the daily friction of business. The daily practice is what allows you to maintain the vector of your ambition year after year without your engine exploding.
It stops you from just reacting defensively to the world and allows you to start strategically building it. You know, you mentioned the 11-year timeline again, and honestly, I think that is the most sobering, realistic part of this entire deep dive.
It really grounds the whole concept.
It does. Osman challenges anyone listening to his presentation to try this practice, but not to judge it tomorrow. He says try it and check back in 5 years.
5 years, that's a long commitment.
It is. You only notice the massive divergence in the trajectories when you zoom out to these half-decade and full-decade intervals. Day by day, you just feel a little calmer. But decade by decade, you evolve into an entirely different caliber of professional.
It reinforces the reality that scaling up in life is not a singular event. It isn't one lucky break or one viral marketing campaign.
No.
It is the invisible, relentless accumulation of tiny, daily psychological advantages. When you can approach a highly stressful business negotiation from a state of centered clarity rather than desperation, you make a slightly better decision.
You hold your ground a little longer.
Exactly. You see a creative compromise the other person missed. Over a decade, thousands of those slightly better decisions compound. They snowball into platinum bank accounts, immovable assets, and a level of resilience that looks like magic to everyone else.
Man, what we have unpacked today really forces a reevaluation of how we view wellness in the context of ambition and high-level success.
It's not just about taking a bubble bath.
No, it's really not. A daily 15 to 20-minute practice isn't a luxury. It isn't a break from your ambitions, and it certainly isn't a vacation from your work. It is the foundational infrastructure that makes the work possible.
Well said.
It is the engine that drives long-term scaling, intellectual growth, and financial resilience. It is the definitive tool that ensures you aren't just spinning your tires in the mud, but actually gaining serious traction and elevation.
It is the dividing line between the professionals who are merely staying busy and the professionals who are quietly building empires.
I love that. So I want to leave you with this thought. Think about the biggest, most ambitious goal you are trying to scale up right now in your own career. The project, or maybe the pivot, that feels like it requires more mental RAM than you currently possess.
The one that's making the laptop fan scream.
Exactly. If you were to dedicate just 15 minutes a day to a simple practice, not to magically achieve instant wealth, but just to relentlessly clear your psychological static and reclaim your bandwidth, where could that compounding clarity take your specific ambition exactly 5 years from today?